What's up? This is Dr. Taylor Krick at the Washington Wellness Center, and today's video in our whiteboard series is about stress. So these are videos, or these are drawings rather, that I commonly do for patients. I do a lot of drawings. I'm very visual. So just some pretty brief videos of some visual representations, some of the things that we see often. So a huge problem today is, of course, stress. And sometimes people come in and they say, Doc, I think it's just stress. I say, well, okay, then what are you here for? What do you want me to do about that? This is your life. But to a degree, they're right. But to a degree, they're wrong. They're thinking about it wrong. So I want to explain, what I mean by that. Because yeah, absolutely, stress is a factor in every health condition and concern. And absolutely, stress needs to be mitigated, but it's not always the type of stress that we're thinking about. So behind me, you see the bucket, and that's we use that metaphor with a lot of things. Your body has a toxic bucket, your body has a stress bucket. So if your stress level's down here, you're fine. You've got some capacity, you've got a little bit of room. But if your stress level's up here, then yes, one stressful event can cause your bucket to overflow. And for a lot of people, it was one stressful trigger that caused their health concern. Maybe their house was damaged in the tornado here we had in town. Maybe it was a loss of a loved one. Maybe it was a bankruptcy or a divorce or a diagnosis or some major stressful event, and their life was never the same. But there are more than one type of stress that's filling your bucket. And we've got a longer video on this and really explaining how these different things, environmental factors and otherwise, trigger a stress response in your body and what that means on a hormonal level and what that means on a cellular level, and a little bit more of the mechanism of this. But there are multiple kinds of stress. So the first one is mental and emotional. Right? So that's usually what people are referring to when they say, I think it's just stress. That's job, that's life, that's bills, that's news headlines, that's the election. It's also just the go of even when you're relaxing, it's like ding, got an alert, got a text, got a Facebook notification, got an Instagram notification. It's constant stimulation, but it's mental and emotional stress, and that triggers a stress response, no doubt. The second one is physical. And if you're my patient, you probably it's actually harder for me to write right side up than it is upside down, because I usually do these drawings upside down. But physical stressors. So those are things like, your diet. If you eat a food that your immune system has a reaction to, it's triggering a stress response, no doubt. Or if you're just eating a high sugar diet and getting the blood sugar roller coaster, it's triggering a stress response, no doubt. So there are physical things. Undertraining, like being sedentary, triggers a stress response. Overtraining can trigger a stress response. There's kind of a hormetic curve to that of, a Goldilocks principle of, not too hot, not too cold, but just right when it comes to exercise. But physical stressors. Sometimes people say, I got in that car wreck and my life was never the same. Or I had a surgery and then my life was never the same. So it's that physical stressor. But the third one, and the most commonly overlooked and probably the most common, is toxic stress, toxic chemical stress. So sometimes it's actually legitimate chemicals. But here are some of the big things. Let me switch colors. Metals, molds, and infections like Lyme, Epstein-Barr, any kind of herpetic virus, HHV, CMV, staph, etc., etc., etc. Toxic chemical stress. So metals, these are heavy metals, things like mercury, things like lead, aluminum is a big one today. So an imbalance of these heavy metals creates a stress response all the time. They have an affinity for the pituitary. The pituitary impacts things like hormone production. adrenals, thyroid, reproductive hormones, growth hormones, so forth. So metals are a big deal. Molds are a huge one. I mean, molds in our practice, it's molds, 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 molds. We rarely ever do a mold mycotoxin test that doesn't show somebody's off the charts, especially if we're suspecting it. Very, very common, very prevalent, and it's literally triggering a stress response at all times. And once again, go into that other video if you want to see like the science behind this, but it's not. This isn't my opinion. This is just a fact. But molds, huge one. And then hidden infections. So things like Lyme disease, things like Epstein-Barr, things that a lot of people carry, but is it creating a stress response in your body, or is it actively replicating, or is your immune system actively trying to fight that all the time? I'll joke sometimes that you could be a Buddhist monk on the beaches of Fiji with $1 billion bank account, meaning like the most chill life, possible is the point. But if you have one of these going on all the time, your body's going through a stress response all the time, and your life on the inside is just as stressful as many other people's who don't have, those luxuries. So this is something we draw all the time. This is something that everybody's dealing with. But one of the things that we look at is what all is filling your bucket. Diet, job, life, bills, viruses, exercise, all the things we just talked about. And then what can we do to make sure that your bucket is emptying? And is there anything that we can do to make it empty faster while we also try to decrease how quickly it's filling? So absolutely, I agree, it's stress, but it's not just the stress that we're thinking about. And we all need to slow down, we all need to pump our brakes, but what are the unseen stressors that we're not aware of? Those are the biggest problems that we see today in practice.